Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the XEROS Technology Group PLC investor presentation for the full year results for the year ended 31st of December 2020. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and you'll be notified once these are ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Mark Nichols, CEO, and Paul Denny, CFO of XEROS Technologies Group. Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to our annual results presentation of 2020. My name's Mark Nichols. I'm the CEO of XEROS Technologies, and I'm joined here today by Paul Denny, our CEO. We have for you today a presentation which we think will take approximately 30 minutes and have allowed up to another 30 minutes after that to answer questions. I'd just like to introduce the meeting by saying our annual results, given the nature of their company and where we are today, is not a numbers-rich presentation, and that will become apparent why as we go through. But Paul Denny will actually update you in terms of where we are opposite our financials and where we intend to get to over the next 2 years. But what we can do today is to provide a good update in terms of the progress that we've made with our technologies and the plans that we have for them. 2020 was a year of establishing a platform for licensing by executing some of the developments with our licensees to prepare them and make them ready for their marketplaces, which indeed they are now entering with our technologies, something that started in late last year, 2020, and continues now. And what we believe will be the case is this year will be a platform for high margin revenues, which will grow significantly next year, not just from with our current licensees that we've got, but also those that we will add during the course of this year in territories which we think are important in terms of a financial opportunity, but also in specific need of the environmental benefits that our technology brings. I appreciate that we have perhaps a number of people on our call who know us reasonably well, some who don't know us particularly well. And so I thought it might be of some use just to share what we do and why we do it, and actually start in reverse order. Why are we doing what we do in XEROS? In the last 20 years, the amount of garments produced on this planet each year has doubled. The resources that they are demanding of this planet, which are indeed finite, are already at the situation where it is truly unbearable. The textiles that we use in the garments that we wear and the fabrics that we deploy, there's one statistic there we've got on the slide here today, which is 93 billion meters cubed of water being consumed in that production. It's probably not well known, but by our calculations, 93 billion cubic meters of water is the equivalent of hydrating the populations of China and also India for a period of something like 42 years. And as our population increases and the wealth of each individual, if that increasing population increases, this population will put demands which are already unbearable into the point which is it is completely untenable for a number of the geographies where these garments are made and where the fibers are produced. And so for a considerable period of time, our mission within XEROS is actually to be to work on and to bring about a reduction and a slowing down in the resources that are consumed in the clothes that we wear. And so to give you an idea of the what in terms of our technologies, we are involved in the garment life cycle and the fabric life cycle from the point that they are cut, made and trimmed. They are in their raw state, and our technologies work in processes downstream of that, which are obviously very, very significant. We're working on a dyeing application, but today we are in the garment finishing market, specifically in denim. And then subsequently, once these garments are made and they're in our hands and also in the hands of other commercial launderers, for example, we're applying our technologies to radically reduce the consumption and the pollution within those articles. And so on the left-hand side of this chart, just to give you a sense of the increasing impact that we're having on the planet, is we're obviously enhancing the outcomes of the businesses that we work with in terms of reducing the resource consumption that they have, which has tremendous, obviously, cost benefit, not just to them in terms of profits, but what they actually produce. The second thing that we're doing is that the trends which are forced upon those industries, which are indeed secular, will not change, and that's reducing the consumption of those finite resources and reducing the pollution, which is equal and opposite from those inputs. And secondly, in this $1.4 trillion industry, we're addressing two fundamental human needs which grow with the population. One is water and water stress, and secondly is our clothing. So I just wanted to bring that to the forefront in terms of context, in terms of what we do and why we do it, but now to move specifically in terms of our technologies and the progress that we're making with it. Just a quick refresher to everybody, we have two platform technologies. We've got the XORB and X-Drum technology, which works in combination, and the XORBs are introduced into those processes from beyond the cut, make, trim, right the way through to the end of the laundering process. And in the X-Drums, they apply themselves to reducing the water, the chemistry, the energy, the pollution, whilst having extraordinary outcomes in terms of, for example, the laundering process, not only bestowing those benefits, but extending the life of those garment and fabrics by a significant amount, in fact, over 20%. And so if we go back to that very first page and think about all those metrics in terms of the consumption and resource depletion, our technologies in the garment life cycle have the capacity to reduce the washable wardrobe's impact on the planet by 20% per annum, which is a phenomenal set of achievements. And these are now recognized in two of the largest countries on the planet, with our first licensees in our garment finishing and also indeed our laundering, both in large-scale premises and also the home. And I will talk shortly about the progress that we've made there. And the second platform technology that we've got, every time we wash our clothes, and I think everybody's now critically aware of this, is that we produce microfibers. It's the largest source of microfiber pollution, which comes from our washing machine, which is now found across the entire trophic range, i.e. the food chain, including our good cells. And for a period of 5 years, we've been working on finding a solution to that by creating what we believe is the best filtration solution for both industrial and domestic washing machines. And not just in our XORB X-Drum technology have we made significant progress during 2020 and since, in terms of licensing those applications. We've now on the cusp of having a commercial agreement for the large filtration device that we've got for large machines. But today we've got a very significant expose in terms of where we've got our X-Filtra domestic filtration design. So I'll just move on now to go through some specifics before we move into some greater detail on Xfiltra. So, licensees that we've got, Ramsons, they're in South Asia. They entered the market in November last year with one of the largest denim manufacturers and garment finishes in South Asia. Machines up and running. And in addition to that, we've obviously got our commercial laundry applications with IFB in India and C-Line in China. They've gone back due to COVID, not by a substantial amount, but both of those companies will be entering the market very, very shortly with our technologies and are ready to do so. They've completed all the developments in preparation there too, but within the very near future, they will be entering the markets under license from us, and we will be anticipating making announcements on those within the next couple of months. And in spite of the COVID situation thus far in India, our first domestic market entry with the XEROS Technologies, we're anticipating Q4. That's the advice that we've got from our licensee, IFB. This obviously is a very high volume, high value application for us, but where we stand at the moment is that we obviously have to be a little circumspect opposite what's happening in India at this particular point in time, but quite clearly there is a firm and fixed determination to enter the market with more than one product range. And at this particular point in time, we have an 8-month lapse time of work that needs to be completed in order to do so, which may or may not be impacted by COVID. But as and when we might be, quite clearly we would advise to that fact. And as I mentioned at the outset, we are currently working and in discussions in additional geographies to supplement the license income that we've already got in this XORB X-Drum arena. So that's by way of a short update in terms of that platform technology. Now we're going to spend some time on an area which perhaps is not so well known. The microfiber problem that we have across the world is 36% of it comes from our washing machines, about 35% from the cars, tires that are attached to the cars that you drive. Knowing that this is the largest source and the easiest way to address it is through filtration within machines, the French government has legislated to put in place an environment whereby every washing machine manufacturer has to have a filter within their machines by the 1st of January 2025. In effect, that means the whole of Europe, and in fact, Europe is actually looking to adopt this legislation. Every machine in Europe will have that, because there will not be a machine made specifically for France without a filter, whereas the rest of Europe will, by dint of that fact, will actually have a machine with a filter within it. Secondly, we've had the UK very, very recently saying that they are going to table legislation for filtration within machines. And importantly, whilst the first paper has said that we've seen on the subject 2030, there is considered opinion that that will be brought forward to 2025. And also importantly, given the nature of California, not just its size, but also its progressiveness opposite the environmental agenda, California has also tabled legislation, the most aggressive legislation that washing machines have to be fitted with a filter by the 1st of January 2024. Knowing 5 years ago that this was a problem that needed to be solved, we've been working on creating a solution, and we believe the best device that can meet these requirements within the timescales, in fact, in advance of the timescales that are being laid forth in front of a number of jurisdictions. So, to give you a sense of the dynamic, it's 100 million washing machines worldwide. About half of them are in Asia, about a quarter in Europe. The largest producer in the world of a quarter of the machines is a Chinese company called Haier. And as you can see, Whirlpool, Medea, and others as we move up or down the size. But in aggregate, the market is dominated by 8 or 9 companies. These companies have all been late to the party in terms of looking for a solution. And in the last number of months, the level of activity and interaction that we have had with these parties has moved up considerably, both reactively and proactively. And it is done so because we have started to be recognized as an enterprise that quite likely has the solution to the regulations that are going to befall them imminently. And so what we're going to share today and announce today is the plan that we have for the productization and commercialization of the world's first in-machine filtration device, which has the leading aspects in terms of durability, reliability, efficacy, cost, and as importantly, meeting consumer expectations and needs. And I'll come on and show you what we have developed. The organizations that I've shared on the previous slide do not have a history of working together in any way, shape, or form. They've not had a history of developing significant new features and benefits in terms of the machines that they provide to the market, only having minor changes in the designs that they provide and the upgrades that they make year on year. So the challenge that was befalling the industry was, is there a product out there in the marketplace which meets all the criteria, will meet the regulatory standards when they're enshrined into law, and where would we source such a design from? The long and the short of it is they want a part. They want a serviceable, replaceable part. So acknowledging this dimension, what we have done starting 6 months ago, we established a relationship and a contract for the design whereby we would take our intellectual property, the principles of our design, and design a product which would meet all the needs and would fit easily in a standardized manner in every single washing machine being manufactured today by any manufacturer on the planet, to repeat a standard part. Today you are going to see that in 2 forms. One, in an animation, a computer generated image, and secondly, we're going to go on and show you the device that has now been built and is now being tested in washing machines as we speak, under our own management and control, ahead of a program whereby we would anticipate having field trials of our product design with a number of those very large manufacturing companies, appliance companies that were on the previous register thereof, and that we would have a number of agreements whereby, having completed successful field trials, that we would have previously determined the commercial terms in outline that would be agreed between us once successful trials had taken place. With that, we have a view that, given the product design life cycles and testing life cycles and market introduction life cycles that those companies have, that we could likely have a product introduction maybe in late 2022, but more likely in 2023. And so what we have in XEROS today, potentially, ultimately, is a product which will firstly find its way into maybe all the machines that are sold in Europe, firstly, and secondly, as legislation and indeed demand, of which consumers are asking for increasingly, would be deployed more widely under license from XEROS. And so what I'd like to do now is share with you these two artifacts that we've had to give you a very good impression of the product design that we've now brought together. And just before I do so, I'd like to say that obviously our first patent on this was filed in 2017, but we now have what we call a patent thicket around it, where we have something in the region of 7 patents that we filed protect this invention. But not only that, some of the ancillary functionality that you're now about to see. So if we could now run the video, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. So having settled on that design that you've now seen, we've been working with Tata to bring that design into reality whilst making sure, as I said before, that we had the patent portfolio around it, which enables us to share with you today the actual manifestation of the product design now. So if we could just run the second video. So for me, just to describe what's happening here, what you have is in that design, which we've spoken to manufacturers in terms of the total cost. I'm not going to share that cost today, but it's certainly within expectations in terms of being a low cost part to add to the machine. It's an integrated pump, filter and dewaterer. That's the unique combination. And what happens is that the fibers come in post the coin trap into that device, which is spinning at about 1200 RPM. And the fibers start to get caught through centrifugal force on the walls of the mesh. They're quite clever how we designed the fibers to accumulate such that the 2-dimensional becomes a 3-dimensional mesh, with the fibers compounding and also acting as a filtration media as well. And the spinning of the cylinder that you see continues after the finishing of the cycle. And what that enables the filter material, which we call filtride, to do is to dry and to become a very, very consistent semi-dry cake, which makes it easy to dispose of into the solid waste. And we have a similar version of this for the commercial market, where there's an automated dispensing mechanism. And the device itself meets a lot of the criteria, but at this particular point in time, it's unique in terms of having all those features, which is why I think we've had such a significant increase in both the reactive and proactive interactions with a large number of those OEMs that we've seen. So I'm just going to move quickly on just to say 2020 in a sense has been a very, very significant year for us in terms of validation of our technologies, from which we've got, we believe, a solid platform for growth, both in the X-Orb, X-Drum, in the garment finishing and the laundry worlds, and also X-Filtra. And that we have very little more now to do in terms of proving our technology, and it's really about orientating ourselves to enhancing its marketing, but in addition to increasing the number of licensees that we have in each of those application areas. And as I said at the outset, obviously to start to build upon these first license incomes with significant growth within the existing contracts and additions there too. And then I think I would like to move on to share the screen with Paul Denny, who's going to give a quick update in terms of where we are on our financial situation.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. As Mark said, 2020 was a year of transition, and the financials clearly show that. The story of 2020, and indeed of 2019 before that, was all about bringing the cost base down and bringing the cash burn down, and moving out of the direct operations in North America and other parts of the world, and moving to a pure licensing model. So what you can see, with net cash outflow from operations reducing by 55% last year, adjusted EBITDA loss reducing by 53% last year, is that we've made significant strides in bringing that cost base down. And we now have a position where the cost base is the right size to take the business forward, and the licensing income will start to flow in 2021 from the portfolio of licensing agreements, whether that's ransoms in the garment manufacturing world, whether that's IFB or C-line in commercial laundry, IFB in domestic, commercial X-Filtra. All of those application areas are going to produce license revenue this year, and domestic X-Filtra is slated to produce revenue possibly end of 2022, more likely 2023. Now, what this means in terms of the cost base is that since July last year through to the end of April this year, a 10-month period, the average monthly cash burn for the organization is now at 0.4, 0.45 per month. And as I said, that is the right size to take the business forward. And with that, and with the fact that all of the license partners that we have either launched or planning to launch this year, we have not changed the overall guidance. Our overall guidance is that we still plan to reach month-on-month cash break even by the end of 2022, with 2023 being the first full year of cash break even. So let me just say a little more about cash, because you would all have clearly seen that we had a very successful oversubscribed funding round in March of this year, where we raised £9 million gross, and I'll talk about that as well. But in terms of cash, at the end of this month, at the end of April, tomorrow, we will have £11.5 million of cash in the business. We also, this year and next, I would anticipate that we will receive a further £1 million from HMRC for R&D tax credits. So call that 12.5. 12.5 with 0.4 million average spend per month. That funds us through deep into 2023, even on the assumption of no gross margin income over the next 2 years, which is clearly not a realistic assumption. We would plan to significantly increase the gross margin contribution we get as license income comes through. But the point of running through this is that we are funded through to the point of cash break even. We have a stronger balance sheet than we've had for a number of years now, and that is really off the back of the story that Mark has walked you through. Was very well received by our investor community last month, and they were minded to make sure that we absolutely had necessary funding, both to go fast at the ex-filter opportunity, but also to provide us with a contingency funding in the event of further COVID delays. And clearly the situation in India is one that we're very mindful of, but it's worth saying that the IFB, who are our partner in India, are proving to be incredibly resilient. They still plan to launch their commercial laundry machines into the market in about 3 weeks' time, and we will update the market on that when that launch has taken place. They're planning a virtual market launch, and they're actively building a pipeline of sales for that. And at the same time, they tell us that they still commit to the Q4 market launch for domestic washing machines. But, clearly we need to see how the balance of this year plays out for that. So I am actually going to address one of the questions that was raised. I'm going to address it now because I think it fits now. And it was David who raised the question. I'm not going to read out the full question because it's quite a lengthy question with lots of numbers in it. But basically, the point of the question is to ask for clarification around our cash burn on a monthly basis just in the first quarter of this year. He's worked out that it appears that the cash burn for the first quarter of this year is higher than 0.4. And what I want to say on that is that the questioner's maths is entirely right. Cash burn on average over the last 10-month period, as I said, has been at 0.4, but that does not mean it's consistently 0.4 every month. Q1 is traditionally quite a high cash burn period for the company, and it was higher this quarter, this year, for a number of reasons. One, we have our intellectual property insurance renewal payment comes out in Q1, and that is a very sizable cash payment, and that consistently comes through every year. But also this year, we've accelerated a lot of the IP work and filing work and external fees around XFiltra to ensure that with the soft launch of the product that we're doing today, and then with the launch in front of OEMs that we will do over the next few months, we have the IP portfolio in place. So therefore, we have actually spent a lot more than we otherwise would on IP in the first quarter of this year, and that was with the confidence as well of the funding support from our shareholders. So I just want to say that yes, Q1 cash burn has been high, but that's not evidence of a consistently high spend. That was balanced by the fact that Q4 last year we were consistently coming in under 0.4. So with that, and with the overall sort of closing statement on my part, that we see no reason to change our financial plans and our guidance off the back of COVID. We still stick to the plan that says we intend to reach cash break even by the end of next year. So with that, I will hand back to Mark for his closing remarks on the slides.
I think what I'll do is give the closing remarks at the end, but perhaps we could have the first question, and you and I can work through those questions that we've now received.
Mark, Paul, look, thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, do please continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of the screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review those investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you the recording of the presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard on the Investor Meet Company platform. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that your views are better understood by the company. Mark, Paul, perhaps before we just touch on those live questions that we've had in, we did have a pre-submitted question and did touch on it slightly, but may I just read this one out, and if there's anything further to add, that'd be great, and we can just move into the live Q&A. It reads as follows: you recently conducted a placing to raise new capital. Can you explain the reason for this and what the funds will be used for?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. So, this was laid out in the shareholder circular that was published at the time, and is still available on the investor relations website. But we went out initially asking to raise £5 million, and the principal reason for that was to accelerate the commercialization of Xfiltra. As Mark said, and as I touched upon in my piece, we think there is a 2-year timeline between now and when Xfiltra is producing consistent royalty revenue for us, and that 2-year timeline is roughly what we think it will take for us to move the industry from its position now to one of significant adoption. And that spend was really to allow us to do two things. One was to put some marketing resource around Xfiltra, because having the product that we have now, knowing that we would have the product now, we need to tell the world about this, and we need to put some significant marketing investment around this. And the other part of it was to have the resource and the project management capability to run multiple sets of field trials with OEMs, potentially in multiple parts of the world, to bring the OEMs to a point where we can sit down and talk terms with them around adoption. The other part of the fundraise was to ensure that we had a contingency on the balance sheet to see us through any impact of COVID, because clearly, it's an ever-evolving situation. The position that the world is in with COVID now is distinct from that which it was at the start of the year. We can't say with any confidence, I don't think anybody can say with any confidence what position the world is going to be in over the next 3 to 6 months. But it was incumbent upon us to make sure that we were well funded for any eventuality. Now, what we actually found when we were talking with our major institutional shareholders, that they were very bullish around Xfiltra and really wanted to make sure that we were well funded with that, but also to make sure that they had a part of this. And so we were oversubscribed, and that's why we ended up with 9 million. So with that, I think that was the only published question. I think we'll address some of the questions that have come in during the meeting.
That'd be fantastic. If you wouldn't mind just reading out the question and giving your answer where appropriate to do so, thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. And indeed, having the funding that we've got in our balance sheet helps us take a very good and balanced table opposite some of the very large companies that we're actively engaged with. So we've got one question here, which is, one of the videos I watched before investing in XEROS was of a laundry that washed for the hotel industry, and they said that not only it needed less detergent, but the result was better and the towels were better. In what ways are you still promoting this aspect of the XORB solution? So this is an axiomatic point about our washing technology, how our XORB and XDRUM work together. And it goes back to the very outset of the presentation, is that every day in everybody's homes across the world, the washing machines that you use are not only using huge amounts of resource, but they are foreshortening the length and lifetime of your clothes. Levi's 2 days ago started their new program, Buy Better, Wear Longer. In the course of the last year, working with IFB and Sea Lion, who undertaken trials with their customers, pilot customers, and in addition, conducted independent research about what our technology does to improve garment care and extend garment life. XEROS does prolong the life of your clothes, whilst reducing the environmental and financial cost. This is profound, not just in terms of the economic argument for the consumer, but one pair of jeans, the cotton that is within them takes 5 tons of water to grow. If you reduce the amount of denim required in the planet by 20%, that one pair of jeans extending its life by 20% is a ton of water. That ton of water is about 1.5 people's drinking or hydration needs for a year. And reducing that burden in the upper ends of that value chain, you're reducing that burden in areas which are under acute water stress. And it is absolutely no surprise that we operate in the 2 countries which actually have the highest issues with regard to, garment manufacturing, also in terms of water stress. To accentuate the point in terms of how this is now being marketed and sold, IFB on the domestic side of things are entering the market not just with the environmental and also the economic benefits, but they're putting together, and I won't betray or steal the march on their marketing plans because they are confidential to them, but the whole value proposition being marketed in India and elsewhere is around the fabric care and garment life extension with the additional benefits that I've alluded to. So it is a fundamental part of what we do, what we bring, and it not just has the impact of the washing laundry process, but it has very significant upstream impacts in terms of reducing clothing demand. And I guarantee within the next 10 years, we won't be talking about fast fashion, we'll be talking about slow fashion. And with the marketing that Paul has been talking about, and with the examples of what we've got in the field, and increasingly so, we will be one of the companies whose technologies really add to the slow fashion equation. We have another question here. In terms of competitor analysis, how strongly do you regard other ex-filter competing products against your own? And how will you beat them to the enviable position of being in every machine that's produced? Yeah, that's a good question. And obviously we spend a lot of time thinking about that. We do undertake very comprehensive intellectual property appraisals and searching, and at this particular point in time, in terms of patents that we can see, at this particular point in time, you can never say never, but there's nothing out there from a protected position that is worrying to us, opposite the proposition that we have and that we've protected, number one. Number two, generically, if you weren't to go for our device, you could go for what's called a cartridge device, so a generic alternative. There's none inside a machine at the moment, and they do exist outside a machine, but that requires you to put a cartridge which has got a dense 3-dimensional polymer matrix in it. The water's flushed through it, and the fibers and a lot of other stuff as well is in that matrix, and then you take that cartridge out, you send it off, and you put a new one in. The product that we see in the market outside the machine that's on the cartridge basis is a subscription model at about £130 a year. I'm not going to give any indicative pricing opposite our technology, but it is a fraction of that, bearing in mind that would be an annual cost. So we think opposite the criteria, both in terms of protection from a patent perspective and also from the durability, reliability, efficacy, cost, ease of use, we have advantages across that spectrum number one. And number two, I mean, Paul spoke of this, is that it's no good just having all those things. We have to occupy the market very, very quickly, which is why we've took the decision to create a product design which can be universally deployed. So that's a broad response in terms of intellectual property out there and also generic competition. Another question on X-Filter: who will be responsible for manufacturing X-Filter? XEROS or the washing machine manufacturer? We spent a lot of time getting out of being a direct, being involved in direct businesses, build, own, operate. That's not what we do. We have a spectacularly talented team of engineers, scientists who have the capability to do what we've presented earlier in the presentation. And so, just bear with me. Yeah, so we would never be in a situation of manufacturing. The appliance manufacturers today either outsource the manufacturing of parts, or indeed some of them manufacture their own. Our primary objective is to license our design to the washing machine manufacturers and for them to make the decisions on whether they want to make or buy. But irrespective of those two production strategies or sourcing strategies, we would intend to have a royalty per device. Does the introduction of your device require significant change to manufacturing processes of machines? And who would those manufacturers not create their own version of the part and add it to the existing part? Okay, so I think I've answered the patent part. We've spent 5 years on creating this differentiation and the intellectual property around it. But in terms of significant changes to the machine, the location of where we've put the X-Filter on the top left-hand side, much of the detergent drawer is actually redundant. And the reason the detergent drawer went on the top left-hand side is that that's where the spare space is within machines. And I think you saw from the CGI rendering that we've got a device that fits in that top left-hand corner. And we've done that to make sure that it doesn't interfere with the rest of the machine. And to give you an idea what happens, there's going to be some telemetry which is connected up to the controller on the top right hand side, but that's simple wiring and changes to the code on the PCB. And whereas today you've got an effluent pipe which is on the downstream of the coin trap, that will then run up to the top left hand side that you see, and then we've got an outflow from the X-Filter, then runs down to what would have been the effluent pipe previously. So in terms of internal changes, it doesn't interfere, and the additions going in are very simple and low cost, and that's all been part of our own and our joint design brief with Tata.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll pick up a question. It's a question, £1 million tax credit was expected in 2020 and 2021 combined. Is that still the case, and was the tax credit received in 2020? Yes. If you look at the cash flow statement that was published along with the RNS this morning, you'll see that last year, it was Q4 last year, we received £698,000 from HMRC for tax credit. In 2021, I suspect we will receive a slightly smaller amount than that. So in aggregate, we will receive over £1 million. So yes, that was received. There's also a question, I'll pick this up as well. Question was, will IFB launch its commercial machines in Q2 with the COVID situation in India? How does the revenue model work? And do they have to sell those machines before you get the license money? So the first part of that question, in terms of launching Q2, we answered that earlier. Yes, they absolutely will launch. It's a matter of weeks away. In terms of the license model, we receive both a license for the machine. So every time IFB or Sea Lion or Ransoms sell a machine, we receive a high mid single digit royalty on that machine. And we also receive ongoing royalties for the provision of XOrbs. The classic kind of razors and blades model. So yes, I mean, of course, those companies have to sell those machines for us to get the license income. And this is the point that we've consistently made over the last 12 months, is that the top line of XEROS and the revenue of XEROS, because we are a full licensing model, our top line now is entirely dependent on the sales activities of our license partners. But as we've chosen to license the technology to generally the incumbent market leaders in every territory and every application that we play in, that's what gives us the confidence around the revenue growth.
There's a question here. It says, does the XORB technology work the same in smaller domestic laundry machines compared with the commercial? The XORB X-Drum technology is a platform technology. It works, it's the same approach that is used in the garment and denim finishing world, as well as the commercial laundry machines and the smaller domestic machines. It is exactly the same. We do use different polymer XOrbs in the garment finishing side of things. And the reason we use that is that we're not looking for stain removal or cleaning in garment finishing, not significantly anyway. We're actually looking to deposit molecules. So we actually use a different polymer in that end of the business, but elsewhere it is all completely uniform. The shape, size and density of the XOrbs are also uniform. So we actually have a standard size platform that we use throughout our XORB and X-Drum technologies. We have some other questions now, but I think what we should do is answer those in terms of the written form. I'd just like to summarize, if I may. So we have developed our technologies. They are now working, and the benefits that accrue are real, and they're now proven. Proven to the point that we have launches happening of incredibly credible companies in very large geographies from which we can grow our license platform from. And it is very clear where we want to grow. We've defined the scope of our company, and so now we have growth paths. We've defined the applications. The growth paths for our XORB X-Drum technology are quite clearly going to be China and India, and then selective geographies elsewhere which have very specific needs, both economic, environmental, opposite those technologies. And of course, our ambition in our XORB X-Drum technologies is to see it in many homes across the world. And with IFB being the segue, we believe, to that eventuality or reality. And increasingly, we've conducted market research, including in India, is that there is very strong appeal and demand for our domestic laundry technology. And in Xfiltra, quite clearly, we may just have the de facto solution for the largest source and easiest to remediate, i.e. within our washing machines, the easiest and best solution to deal with it. And not only that, but having it in a near-term horizon with regulatory enforcement increasingly becoming clear to mandate it. We do need to invest the money that we've raised and invest it incredibly wisely. We're very selective. As I've said, we don't need to have very significant increases in our technical capability. And Paul's talked about our intellectual property being, slightly bumpy curve, but we know what that curve is and what it what its profile will be over time. But we do want to make sure that our marketing capability really is what it needs to be. And 5 years ago, I said there will come a time in XEROS when we are at a level of confidence, belief, and proof that we should reach round the intermediaries between us and our end consumers and tell consumers what we do, such that they would then ask those who supply them, and some of those companies that we saw earlier would have consumer pull of XEROS technologies, such that those companies would want to embrace and license the inventions that we've created. And so therefore, that is going to be a significant area for us. And it's also true to say that we need to increase our competence within our management team. And so we are looking to increase the competence of two of our teams. Firstly, our executive management team, and we're actively recruiting in that sphere to achieve that objective. And we strengthened our board last year. We increased early last year the numbers of our board with bringing on board our new chairman, Klaas de Boer, who represents our strategic investor, COFRA. But it is also his and the board's intention to increase the relevant capability and diversity on our board to be able to have a better insight and better connections with the worlds that we're now working with. And quite clearly, that is in the consumer domain and also in the consumer appliance domain. And so on that second tier, the board level tier, an active program to do that. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we will see that our board develops such that it is balanced opposite the demands and opportunity that we have. And then last but no means least, Paul mentioned it, we have the funding that we need to execute. With that increased capability, we will have that capability to execute. We have the technology, we have the IP, and we also have the cushion against potential further impacts of COVID. Not that they've been profound upon us thus far, but we do have that contingency. I'd just like to thank everybody for attending the call. We do appreciate it significantly. We do value this opportunity to explain what we do to a number of investors that we don't frequently get to meet. And we also welcome the candor and challenge of the questions that we receive. And whilst, as I think I've said this before, it is difficult for us to answer them in different forums, apart from this, we hope today's been of value in so doing. And we look forward to doing so again with our interims, firstly, but secondly, we've obviously trialed some very significant events which would be worthy of news flow, and we're very much hopeful and expectant that they will accrue within the timescales that we've shared today. So on behalf of myself and Paul and our board, thank you very much.
Mark, Paul, thank you again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback. If you've accessed the meeting from our website, the feedback page will appear in front of you. If you've accessed the meeting from the link we sent to you in the email, you'll simply be asked to log back in to submit your feedback. It takes just a couple of seconds and is greatly appreciated by the company. On behalf of the management team of XEROS Technology Group PLC, thank you very much for attending today's presentation. Good afternoon.